Wiping the sweat and dust from his face, Pete looked up into the heavy, bright, late-morning sky. Shit, he thought. It's not going to work out that way today. To hell with this damn farm. When a guy doesn't feel up to it, he doesn't feel up to it. I should have stayed home yesterday. But no. Old Mr. Die Hard won't let a cold keep him away from work. Damn him. But there's nothing to do this weekend. And I can leave the damn tractor here overnight. It won't be the first night in the open air, and it won't be the last. Throwing a disapproving glance at the motionless tractor and giving the wheel one last kick, the man turned and headed toward the white farmhouse that stood a few hundred yards away. He and Susan lived on a farm he'd bought cheap. His wife wanted to start a small business, making artisan soaps and essences from natural products. He grew strawberries, raspberries, lavender, and many other herbs on 20 acres of land. During the growing season, it took Pete most of his time to make sure everything grew properly. Susan did a lot during the week, but he didn't think it was right or safe for her to do the heavy labor. Pete wasn't remarkable for his height, 5 feet 7 inches and 160 pounds, but it was all solid muscle, thanks in large part to the farm. His wife, with whom he'd been with for 5 years, was 6'3" and 100 pounds after he'd fished her out of the creek. The chestnut beauty was not very large, and he had to admit she wasn't overly beautiful, but damn, she was sexy. Some women weren't classic beauties, but they reeked of sexiness. Susan was one of them. Cursing the upset stomach and headache that plagued him, Pete slowly wandered toward the house, his boots sinking deeply into the rich soil. All the while, he felt sorry for himself. If there was one good thing, it was the way Susan would fuss around him when he returned to the comfort of their home. She was kind to him, and he was very lucky to have her. As he approached the end of the garage, he was surprised and pleased to see Randy's black sports truck parked not far from the door. He wasn't going anywhere today, but Randy already knew that. Still, they could watch the ball game while Susan fussed. Maybe the day wouldn't turn out so bad. Pete took off his boots on the back porch and opened the door to the mudroom. After brushing the dirt off them, he carefully set them in place in the corner. It felt good to get the heavy things off. Walking barefoot into the bright yellow kitchen with oak cabinets, he was surprised Susan wasn't there. It was already 10:15, and a late morning for her not to be doing chores. Normally, he would have expected to see her sitting at the kitchen table with a brightly colored floral-patterned tablecloth. Perhaps she wasn't feeling her best either. Or more likely, she was chatting with Randy in the living room while his best buddy went out into the field to see where he was driving that damn tractor. He was too faded to come up with an answer. He'd find out after a while anyway. Unbuttoning his shirt as he walked through the kitchen into the living room and onto the hallway leading to the bedrooms. He was going to change before he sat down and rested. From the way he felt, if he sat down, he wouldn't be able to get up for a while. His head was full of cobwebs, and he wanted to be ready to relax when he sat down. Randy and Susan weren't in the living room either. Without thinking about why, Pete walked down the hallway past the children's room, then past his den and headed for the bedroom. The door to the bedroom was open, and Pete walked in wearing stockings before he noticed the couple on the bed. Well, that wasn't quite right. Susan was lying on the bed, her expensive wedding bell quilt crumpled beneath her. She was on her knees, her ass raised up and exposed. Randy was standing next to the bed behind her. He was just undoing the buttons on the cuffs of his blue denim shirt, which was now open and hanging from his arms. It seemed the couple had rushed into the bedroom to get down to business. Susan's blouse was on the floor by the door, her bra halfway to the bed, and her jeans and panties were in disarray on the floor next to the bed, on top of her shoes. She was still wearing white socks. Pete froze half a step. The shirt hung from his hand and he dropped it to the floor. Frozen in place with his mouth open, he watched the handsome men amuse themselves. Jesus, he thought, a friend wouldn't do that. This isn't my best friend. That son of a bitch isn't even a friend. He treats me like a sucker. I wonder how come I didn't notice what was going on. Pete must have stood like that for at least 10 minutes before Susan cried out and clung to Randy again. Susan collapsed onto the bed, and Randy collapsed on top of her. Pete silently turned and walked out of the bedroom. The first thing he did was head to the hall bathroom. There he closed the door and then knelt over the toilet and dumped his breakfast into the spotlessly clean porcelain bowl. Kneeling with the taste of vomit in his mouth, he tried to piece together what he had just seen. This was clearly not the first time. This was a normal, scheduled Saturday morning. How long had this been going on? Ever since the fields had dried out enough for him to go out on them, he'd spent every Saturday morning there, usually until 2 or 3 in the afternoon. That was 4 months ago. He was busting his ass while Randy was busting Susan's ass. Son of a bitch. While his good buddy Randy was tearing his wife's ass off. Bastard. He loved the woman, but she entertained him on a regular basis. No amount of good conversation could fix that. She had been cheating on him for months. She'd planned it all out meticulously, and until he'd gotten sick, he hadn't realized she didn't love him as much as she claimed. Maybe it wasn't true, but it seemed to him that she only wanted him for the paycheck. She didn't care about what cheating would do to him. She was just interested in enjoying herself and not letting him find out about it. He was going to have to face them, but he was afraid of Randy's temper. He was a big son of a bitch, so he'd have to bring the equalizer with him. Not only that, but he'd have to take precautions. Call it prophylaxis. If he waited for Randy to make his move, he'd probably get off with a busted head. And damned if he didn't still feel like shit. Randy would probably kill him. He'd already seen him in a rage. Wiping his face with a towel, he left the hall and headed for his den. Wondering how the 2 rogue bastards hadn't heard him yet, he pulled his digital camera from his desk and, grabbing his equalizer from where he kept it on the table by the door, walked back out into the hall. The equalizer was an innocent-looking coil of spring steel, 8 inches long and just under an inch thick. As he walked back to the bedroom, he tossed it up with his wrist, and the rest of the spring steel weapon slipped silently out and locked into place. Pete now had a baton 20 inches long, made of very stiff but flexible steel. He had never used it before, but now he was going to put it to the test. Returning to the bedroom, he saw that his former friend, all 6 feet 2 inches and 230 pounds of him, was now standing with his legs hanging down next to the bed, his back to the door. Susan was still kneeling in front of him on the bed, but now facing him. While Pete watched, Randy grabbed her hair and pulled her face back. Pete could now see her face. Her eyes were fixed on Randy. "Well, slut, what do you say to that?" growled Randy. Pete took a picture of the couple in love with the flash off. Noticing that they fit nicely into the frame of the mirror on the dresser next to the bed, he took another picture, this time including their reflection. Heck, he even got an artistic shot of his cuckolding. He had managed to get about a dozen shots when Randy reached down, hooked his hands just below Susan's arms, and lifted her into the air. Pete took another picture, noticing that his wife had her eyes closed as she was lifted into the air. She wrapped her legs around Randy's waist and pulled her hips to his thighs. At that moment, she opened her eyes and saw Pete. She opened her mouth to scream or shout, but Pete never knew which, because Randy at that moment covered her mouth with his and swallowed whatever sounds she was about to make. Susan began to wriggle frantically, trying to get free. Pete thought her eyes were going to pop out of her forehead as he took 2 more shots. Randy was making giggling noises deep in his throat. Pete decided that Randy thought his wife was experiencing some kind of unbelievable ecstasy. Deciding that this had gone on long enough, Pete flicked his left wrist holding the equalizer, and the tip slid between Randy's legs and into his taut balls. Randy tore forward without a sound and collapsed on the bed on top of Susan. He tried to scream, but there was no air in his lungs. What little sound he managed to make went straight into Susan's open mouth. It seemed to Pete that Randy was a man-sized balloon that someone had pinned with a pin. Susan was wedged under him, her legs dangling wildly in the air on either side of his thighs, their whiteness contrasting with the dark tones of Randy's skin. Randy's hands and arms were balled into fists, and her face was tucked into his chest, which covered her mouth and nose. She couldn't breathe and thought she was going to die. Pete stood next to the couple on the bed. Randy was trying to curl up in a ball, trying to reach his balls with his hands. He was desperate for a cup, but Susan was lying on top of him and he couldn't reach. While Pete watched, Randy began to moan and spit up as he finally managed to get some air into his lungs. This time, with a full swing of his arm, Pete backhanded the equalizer onto Randy's right knee. There was a cracking sound on impact, and Randy raised his head. He saw Pete standing calmly beside him. The former friends looked at each other for a long time, Pete calmly, Randy in agony. Without a word, without pity, Pete shoved Randy off the woman lying beneath him and onto the floor. Susan shoved him off her, then simultaneously tried to cover her nakedness, sit up, and reach out a pleading hand to Pete. Inside, Pete felt cold and empty as the stomach he had emptied into the toilet. Cold as the porcelain he felt on his chest as he knelt. All he felt at this moment towards the woman he loved and married was contempt. "Peter, all is not as it seems," she finally managed. Pete only grinned. "I heard you telling him you live for Saturday mornings, Susan. Saturday mornings when I'm hard at work on the farm, trying to get your business going. This is not a one-time thing, Susan. I've stood and watched and listened to you have me. It's been going on for a long time. That's all I need to know, that you need his or someone else's sex, that you won't be satisfied with just me. Pack your things and leave. I'll be out in an hour. You can call and make arrangements to pick up what you have to leave behind. I'm giving you a station wagon, so get your stuff, pack it in the station wagon, and get out of here. With the pictures you and my buddy Randy gave me, don't even think about asking for more. Let me know where you live, and I'll have my lawyer contact you. I keep all credit cards and cancel them on Monday. I think I will call them stolen this afternoon, so don't try to use any of them. There will be no money in the bank accounts either. I'll transfer them today. I'll close all the accounts on Monday. If you're going to make a case out of this, try to make me look like the bad guy. I have pictures. I can post them for others to see, and they can never associate it with me. If you want to prove yourself in this town, you need to keep that in mind. I'll give you $1,000 to live on until you let me know where you live, and then you can talk to my lawyer." "I loved you, Susan. We were going to have children. If you want to buy a farm, I have a vacant, inexpensive one. 20 good acres, just right for growing herbs and flowers for potpourri. Better yet, forget the station wagon. Take that lying asshole with you. You can ride in his truck and arrange to pick up the station wagon later. Have a nice life." 2 hours later, Pete watched them drive away, Susan driving the truck and Randy in the passenger seat. He wondered if he would ever see her again. But that was nothing. Her parents and friends lived in this town, and he worked here. They ran into each other all the time. He knew he still had feelings for her, but how could he ever trust her again? Well, he had fought the good fight and would stand his ground if she didn't come to him. It was unlikely they could ever be together again. Feeling as hurt as he did now was impossible. But time would tell. In the meantime, he would live for one day at a time. What was it the guy in Sleepless in Seattle said? Just keep getting up every morning, taking one breath after another. Something like that. And of course Susan wasn't dead, though it felt the same to him now. Pete locked up the house, climbed into his Ford Mustang, and drove into town to spend the night in a motel.